In the recap of Idaho's GOP convention yesterday, we ran through some of their resolutions that passed, and just in a throwaway line, we mentioned how one of those resolutions is wanting only citizens to vote in our elections. It's even part of the updated Idaho Republican Party platform. And as we said yesterday, what comes out of these conventions, we could likely see coming to the State House next legislative session. However, this specific issue was actually addressed last session. House Joint Resolution 5 is a constitutional amendment that would make it clear only Idaho residents who are citizens of the United States can vote in any election held in Idaho. A constitutional amendment means it's up to the voters to decide, but some lawmakers worry the language of this provision isn't as clear-cut as it's intended, or if it is, what that could actually mean. Here's Joe Paris to explain.
The sounds of summer sound a little different on the diamond than at the Idaho State House.
Yeah, this is some inside baseball, but stuff people should know.
On that topic this week, a council of Idaho lawmakers met to finalize language for a constitutional amendment set for the November ballot. Passing the legislature and ending up on your ballot as HJR 5, it looks to add to the state constitution a provision that says, quote, only Idaho residents who are citizens of the United States are qualified voters, and that non-citizens are not eligible to vote in any election held within the state.
There really aren't non-citizens voting in our elections in any measurable numbers that I'm aware of. But this makes people feel good that non-citizens aren't going to steal our elections. The problem to me is that I think they botched the language.
The language House Minority Leader Alana Rubel was referring to comes in the pro-con section. Voters are given a nonpartisan list of arguments for and against to help them decide which direction they want to vote in. But Representative Rubel says that didn't quite happen. Quickly, though, let's go back to the ballot question.
And here's the key language: in any election held within the state of Idaho. That goes a lot broader than what our Constitution says right now. A vote for your HOA board is an election held within the state of Idaho. An election for student council at your local middle school is an election held within the state of Idaho.
Rubel said Democrats wanted to include language to tell voters about their concerns about the quote-unquote any election provision. She said they were denied.
We are not going to let you put your anti-statements into the official statement that goes out to voters, so that the voters will not get the actual argument against it. They will get this version that the people who want the thing to pass will allow you to see.
We basically deal with managing the issues of the legislature during the interim.
Senate Pro Tem Republican Chuck Winder was also a part of the Legislative Council meeting. He sees the end result differently.
And it seems to be like every time we go through this, there's always, it kind of gets politicized, but it starts out with, a nonpartisan staff attorney drafting the language, and that's where we ended up, basically, was going back to that language.
Winder says final language actually came from a neutral drafter.
Well, I think it's pretty fair. Again, if you try to do anything by committee, which is what was going on yesterday, everybody had a great idea about this word or that word, or, we ought to add this or that, take this out. But what we came back to was, hey, we have professional staff that are nonpartisan that wrote it, and we came back to that point of view, and that's the language that's out there.
Of course, I don't want non-citizens voting in gubernatorial elections or voting for president or anything like that. But I think the answer is not to put super sloppy language into the Constitution.
Well, I think it's a misread. We're basically amending a portion of the Constitution that applies to public elections. It doesn't apply to other elections.
This is an effort to solve a pretty largely non-existent problem, but I think it would create a very real problem by putting in hugely overbroad, sloppy language into our Constitution.
So this will be on your ballot coming up in November. And Brian, to go back a little bit to that pro-con that we're talking about, this isn't a new thing. Anytime there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Idaho, voters will see a list of pro and con arguments. And what the Democrats, and Rubel is arguing, that the con argument should include this idea that if this passes, it could mean that in your HOA election, well, maybe you have to be a citizen of Idaho.
If you're a resident, not a citizen, but a non-citizen resident, you have kids going to school, you probably should have a say in what goes on at the school board. But I guess it's all going to hinge on that term. If it's included in the language, public election, is that in there?
It's just in any election in Idaho. Now, you heard what the Senate Pro Tem said, though, that it's in the part of the Constitution that deals with public elections.
Okay.
Like so many things that come out of that building, we will find out if it passes and if it goes to court.
All right. We'll see what happens, but thanks, Joe. There is